Today let's talk about the death penalty. It is very interesting subject because it's clear that it is still used today in many countries. Some states in the United States still use it as Utah or Mississippi, even though is the world's leading power. We will then realize that being a civilized country does not mean that we have a very progressive penal system. The Code of Hammurabi of Babylon codified the death penalty for the first time. Maybe the capital punishment already exists in the history, but there is not codified. A lot of culture use the death penalty for punish different crimes. However, it is interesting to note that United Kingdom is the European country which uses the most the death penalty. During the first part of the 19th century, that would be more than 1,000 condemnations to death and executions every year to the middle of the 19th century. This is a huge number compared to the number of people sentenced to the same sentence in the continent at the same time. For example, in Prussia there were less than 30 executions a year. The problem is that in England many crimes deserve the death penalty. If we make a comparison between England and France, at the end of the 18th century, 7 crimes deserved death in France, more than 300 in England. In Middle Ages, prison was sometimes seen as a worse condemnation than death penalty. Starting from there, we realize that the people were used to these condemnations and therefore accept them. In the Middle Ages, in Dover, a person who steals goods in the church will be burned in the face with the key of the church. Another example which illustrates that the English view the penalty of death favorably is Davies, who wrote that England had to conquest Ireland because they are barbarian, because they don't have the death penalty. We see that the death penalty was seen as a feature that showed the evolution of a society. That's why the criminal trial was called the Bloody Code, because the death penalty was the main rule. We must not forget that the England penal system of the time was one of the most unfair systems that could exist. In criminal trials where the prisoner plead not guilty, that could lead to death penalty. Such a trial would last than 10 minutes from the arraignment to the deliberation. However, English penal system give a chance to escape the capital sentence is the Privilegium Clericali, who was established in 1351 by the King Edward II. Criminal law don't like condemn to death a clerk, so this privilege consists to make the prisoner read a verse of the Bible. But it was the same verse during centuries. People were learning by heart this verse and repeat it in front of the judge. If it's just you are always under arrest but you don't die. The privilege can be used only one time in your life, so to be sure that you don't use the privilege a second time, people are in iron branding. This benefit of clergy allow a lot of people to not be condemned to death penalty, but many escape. This say to exclude many crime of the benefit. In fact, every murder or felony with premeditation were excluded. Another element to take into account when talking about the death penalty is the fact that criminal law has no reluctance to condemn kids to death. Even in the 19th century, there are many children condemned to death. The most shocking case is that at the beginning of the 17th century, there is a case of a girl of 13 condemned to death and burned alive to having killed her mistress. The worst is in the 19th century was the century of the first human rights and the emergence of the industrial system, and therefore more civilized world did not help children with the death penalty. In 1814, in one single day in London, 5 children between 8 and 14 were condemned to death and hung just for theft, and in 1833 a child aged 9 is condemned to death and hung for stealing paint. Starting from there, we can really ask the question whether their system was really so admirable as claimed by the French writers who admired the British penal system. In the criminal system, many offenses are sentenced to death when they didn't deserve it. For example, bigamy is sentenced to death, also perjury, the killing of any superior, burglary, and even letting your dog have sex with a royal pet. In fact, there is so many condemnations, death penalty, and especially by hanging, than in London, where hanging days are bank holidays. Hanging was an entertainment, everybody are drunk and attract thousands of people. Think of the start of Pirates of the Caribbean 3, which begin with the hanging of hundreds of pirates and where the crowd goes wild. In this way we realize that as much for the crown, for the judge or the people, the death penalty was the real institution of the criminal law during centuries. The last execution by hanging took place in 1944, before the death penalty was abolished for murder, and in 1949 in Great Britain and in 1973 in Northern Ireland. Although not subsequently applied, the death penalty remained in law for certain crimes until 1998.